Perfect. Okay. So, Phil, thanks for joining. Um, I am excited and both a little nervous to record this conversation because this is the first conversation that I am recording and planning to put up as a podcast. But, I do appreciate you taking some time from your busy day to do this.
Absolutely.
So,
Not a problem.
so you are the Chief Communications and Marketing Officer for Block and its affiliate organizations, Vesper and Titan. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Vesper, Titan, Metronome, and the block platform for blockchain infrastructure and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Got it. So we're going to touch on Vesper in a little bit.
Okay.
But where I wanted to start was actually with a white paper that you wrote in 2017 for the American Association of Ad Agencies.
Wait,
And
you're the guy that read that?
I read that. Yeah, I managed to
You're the
find it.
one. That's great. Awesome.
It's on Scribd. So I didn't have to join the association, fortunately.
Yeah.
But you made a pretty bold claim in that paper. You said that blockchain and Web3 will have a bigger impact than social media did in the mid 2000s, which, I mean, Facebook launched in 2004, Twitter launched in 2006, Instagram, I don't know if you counted that, but that launched in 2010.
Right.
So, I mean, we're going to assume that people listening to this podcast are somewhat familiar with blockchain, maybe less with Web3. So if you want to define that. But my question to you is, like, why do you think that? And how has your stance evolved since publishing that paper?
Wow. Yeah. So that was 4 years ago. And, I think about all the things I talked about in that paper, right? I think about the things I got right, the things that maybe didn't stand the test of time all that well. Um, the title of the paper, if I remember correctly, was "The Marketing Power of Digital Permanence," right? And the thing that I was really the thing about blockchain technology that really resonated with me at the time was again this notion of permanence in a world where digital media is very malleable, right? And it would be a few years later where there were some high profile instances of digital media being malleable to the point that it did a great disservice to the readership, right? And so that's the thing I was really attracted by. And the thing that I and now 4 years later I think about it, I could have de-emphasized the permanence part, even though it's very important, and I could have emphasized the notion of distributed consensus, right? Which I don't think came across as well in the paper. Some of the applications that I highlighted uh, were certainly attractive to me at the time, and they still are as a communicator. For example, I still think that companies are doing really interesting things with supply chain. Whether or not that goes absolutely mainstream, and whether or not it does so in a way that consumers can value it, I think is still to be determined. I talked about loyalty points on there. I don't think that is shaken out the way that maybe people have hoped.
Mhm.
I talked about ownership of virtual items. Now, I discussed it in the context of gaming, but you're seeing this now being reflected in the current craze around NFTs, right? So even though I didn't have a term for it, okay, I got that one sort of right.
Yeah.
And my admonition to the marketing community remains unchanged, and that is that it's really great to explore and be passionate about new technologies and that sort of thing, but also being aware of maybe perhaps its limitations, right?
Mhm.
And I ask people, okay, this thing that you want to do, can it be addressed by more conventional means? If so, do that, and really think about what blockchain technology might be able to offer in a way that is perhaps unique.
Mhm.
So, 4 years later, I got it half right. Maybe I might be moved to revise the paper at some point, but I'm glad you found it actually, because God, it's been a while since I've thought of it. So
Yeah, I mean, I definitely thought you were spot on with digital ownership and NFTs, minus you explicitly calling it out as an NFT. But you touched on supply chain, and
yeah.
something else that I thought was really interesting around that was what you called proof of provenance. So,
Ah, yeah.
what is proof of provenance, and how does that impact blockchain as a storytelling technology? Because you don't often hear blockchain being called that.
Okay, so couple of reactions to that actually. So um, let's start with the supply chain question, right? So the
Hmm.
notion that don't you want to have a consensus-based permanent record of a product as it goes from point A to point B, right? Don't you want to know that there are signatures attesting to the fact that it crossed certain steps or the product has certain characteristics, right? Um, so that could be if you're selling, say, organic cotton or something like that. How
Hmm.
many signatories from how many different places does it take for you to have that confidence that the cotton is organic? There are some projects that have looked into anti-slavery, particularly in terms of fishing. I think one of the examples in the paper borrowed from the fishing industry. And
Hmm.
so, it's the notion that, hey, let's have a permanent record of of the different steps in the value chain for this product. And one of the ideas that I came up with, um, that again, I don't know if it necessarily stands the test of time, because I'm just plucky enough to name it after myself. I came up with something called Gomes's law, which was the number of attestations a product needs is inversely proportional to the distance between that product and your bloodstream. So,
Hmm.
organic cotton for your T-shirt, you're fine if it's, maybe two or three parties attest to it. If it's food, maybe more. If it's medicine, maybe more. And if it's a kidney, maybe even more than that, right?
Yeah.
Um, but one of the issues with a lot of the excitement, particularly around the time I wrote that paper, a lot of the issues around the excitement around uh, blockchain used in supply chain records and proof of provenance is there was this childhood disease around that time where people were saying, well, if it's on the blockchain, it must be true, right?
Hmm.
And part of it I blame on, there was the cover story in The Economist, which, I mean, bravo to them in 2015 for putting this out there, but it called blockchain the trust machine, right? The great chain of being certain about stuff, right? And I
Hmm.
think people took it the wrong way. And people started thinking that, yeah, well, if it's on the blockchain, it must be true, which is kind of like what the pundits were saying about corporate blogging around 2005, right? Is that, wow, if your company is blogging, it means you're transparent. It's like, no, it doesn't. It means that you're using a particular publication platform, but it doesn't mean you're being transparent. You could be lying through your teeth on this thing.
Hmm.
Um, and so my caution was, just because you put something on the blockchain doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be true. But the only thing that you've really made permanent is that if the record is provably tied to your wallet, at this time, at this date, certified that this particular thing was true, right? Uh,
Hmm.
you haven't attested to the truth of it. You've just merely attested to the fact that this is what you claimed at this time by signing that transaction. Now, let's take this to media, and this is where it gets really interesting, right?
Hmm.
Is that actually at Edelman? So I was at the Edelman PR firm for 13 years before I came over to Block, and one of the things I did there was I ran their blockchain center of excellence for my last year and a half there, and that's how I found out about Block, and that's why I'm here. Um,
Hmm.
but one of the projects that we had was something called Reconto, which was, and you can find it right now, github.com/Reconto, because it's open source. And it's basically a WordPress plugin that It's in alpha stage, so if anybody wants to pick it up, go for it. WordPress plugin where it would hash or fingerprint the contents of a WordPress blog post to the Litecoin blockchain.
Hmm.
Uh, and what you therefore do is that you can, if somebody were to surreptitiously change that post, they would have to, create another record. Otherwise, you would have that conflict. And this was born out of a time when I think lawandcrime.com was a website that caught the New York Times surreptitiously scrubbing negative mentions of Sheryl Sandberg, for example. It was during a time where people were criticizing Comcast because its net neutrality pledge would frequently change without any indication that it had changed. So we created this Reconto thing, and it just sort of sat on the shelf until I left, and then it became open source. And again, it goes back to this notion of how do you merge blockchain technology with publishing in order to have this idea of what is a provable audit trail of the time, date, source, and state of a piece of digital content, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it allows you have to kind of rethink the truth. Now back to the supply chain question. What if, for example, you're transporting goods that must be refrigerated, like vaccines, for example, to make it very current. And let's say, for example, the refrigerated truck dies on the freeway, and the temperature in the cargo is rising, 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 and the truck driver is like, "Oh yeah, but I can't turn around and go back," and oh my God, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Takes his cooler maybe from his lunchbox and puts it on the temperature sensor or something like that. I mean, there are different ways one can mess with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is a topic worth exploring, and I think that it's a particular nut that has yet to be cracked. But at the same time, I think as long as everybody is honest as to its limitations, those limitations being human failure, we'll still get to the right place. And I think the solution is, again, the more signatures, the better. The more inputs, the better, such that the reasonable person can look at it and say, okay, I'm pretty confident that nobody had his arm on the other guy, and coerced a signature or something like that. All different ways you
Right.
can think about it, really.
Yeah, I guess thinking about it from the consumer's perspective, you really have to put your trust in those attestations and who is attesting to it on the blockchain. But you won't necessarily know, like in the example of the vaccine, whether or not the truck driver, like you said, hacked the system in a way where he was able to prove that, oh no, it stayed below this temperature
Right,
because he put
right,
it in his Yeti box or something like that.
right.
You
Well,
know?
and also, I mean, I think there's um, again, I don't want to discourage people from exploring these topics and these solutions.
Mhm.
But at the same time, yeah, it comes down to, um, you know, do you as a reasonable consumer accept X amount of attestations? Now, again, according to the Gomes law I said earlier, that might change depending on whether we're talking about vaccines or beef jerky, right?
Mhm.
Right, or T-shirts, for example. But I think people really do need to think about, again, the the potential for, for, I don't want to say fraud because it's a strong term, but yeah. But also, what's also richly important too is that you mentioned the consumer, you mentioned the user interface. Now, here's another challenge that nobody is talking about in the supply chain scenario, is that by the time it's presented to a consumer, um, and let's say it's presented on their mobile phone, um, through that 3-inch screen, has anything been presented to them that makes them trust the data they're getting more than through conventional means? Because by the time it goes through that 3-inch screen, what exactly do you know, right? That you didn't know before from a trust perspective. And so,
Hmm.
what happens then is maybe less of a technological issue, but more of a consortium marketing issue, right?
Mm.
Is that, what is going to be the new good housekeeping seal of approval or something like that, where it's like, well, okay, if I'm getting this information through this particular experience or this particular app, and I see that these attestations have taken place, I now have greater confidence than before, right?
Hmm.
And that's going to take time, and that's going to require probably a lot more effort and a lot more money and a lot more um, cross industry and cross company collaboration than uh, than the um, than the engineering question alone, I would imagine.
Probably government or at least pseudo governmental bodies as well, I'd imagine. Like,
Well, but also a lot of people who get into this space have a very libertarian bent to them, right? And I
hmm.
think that one of the things that drives a lot of people in this industry is the notion that, well, if I have this audit trail that is highly, highly tamper resistant, especially in the case of Bitcoin, for example, um, is that enough, right? And are we putting actual teeth in the concept of self-regulation, right? Because we see this all the time where industries go through this period of, oh, we're self-regulating because we have too much to lose if we lose the trust of our public, right? And then what do? They do something that makes them lose the trust of their public. And then here comes Sarbanes-Oxley, and here comes Dodd-Frank, and here comes all these regulatory regimes that come in. And then the pendulum starts to swing back again. And maybe properly presented to governmental bodies, they might understand this technology as something that biases the pendulum towards at least more effective self-regulation. Maybe that's the techno-utopian in me talking, but
Hmm.
you think of the record fudging that was taking place during the great accounting scandals of maybe about 2 decades ago, Enron. The case of Health South is probably not as famous as Enron, but they actually, one of the ways that they cooked the books was when they found out that the regulators didn't pay attention to expenses under $5,000. If I remember the story correctly, they literally wrote a program that would create, hundreds of sub $5,000 fake transactions in order to cover up the hole, right?
Hmm.
Which would be difficult to do in the blockchain sense, right? And
Right.
it's a fun thought experiment, one that I don't pretend to have an answer for, but it's a fun thought experiment. If blockchain technology were known, mature, and widely deployed, uh, would you have had an Enron, or how much harder would it be for an Enron to happen, right? Again, I don't have that answer, but it's a very, very interesting thought experiment to go through.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'll leave that up to viewers to ponder on that. I do want to pivot slightly. Um, so, how has your previous work with Wikipedia and Reddit influenced your outlook on open source and online communities?
Incredible question. Oh, wow. So to spin up the viewers slash listeners here, uh, about 2012, I was really active in a sort of a PR industry wide effort to get companies and their PR firms to behave according to Wikipedia's rules, on the notion that um, it's in everybody's best interests to have accurate entries, right? And there was this kind of bias in Wikipedia where it was like, Well, if you were overly negative about the company, that more or less counts as being neutral, right? And so a company representative would be deemed as having a conflict of interest, but their antagonists, maybe in the consumer affairs or even the NGO community or whatever, were considered as being completely neutral, right? Which is patently false. So
Mm.
that's how that started. And while I didn't have a specific focus on Reddit as specific as Wikipedia, um, the instinct is still the same, right? In terms of transparency, in terms of being above board, in terms of um, being upfront with who you are and what your motivation is for being within those forums. And it's all but the most curmudgeonly that will show up and that all but the most curmudgeonly would be happy to welcome that conversation. I think what happened was that Wikipedia's rules were so unevenly enforced by the community and so opaque that it inspired bad behavior by PR firms and their representatives, such that maybe perhaps they would go in under pseudonyms or or create what are called single purpose accounts, right, which do nothing but goaltend somebody's entry. Um, and it came with the recognition that not liking a community's rules is not a justification for breaking them, right?
Mm.
And even so, the many years that I was doing this, about 6 years at Edelman, and we had created a group called Corporate Representatives for Ethical Wikipedia Engagement, CREW for short, because all the good acronyms were taken. Um, and the tendency towards bad behavior was something that we absolutely fought against, and I would get into with clients and both uh, retained and wished for. I would get into these very heated arguments where it was like, well, you don't understand. Our stakes are so higher than caring about what goes on with this, air quotes community. And I said, well, would you say that about any other community? Would you say that about a community known as regulators? Would you say that about a community known as customers? Would you say that about a community known as journalists? Probably not, right? But
Mm.
because people tend to overvalue credentialism, people looked at Wikipedia as like, who are these unwashed ruffians? And I wanted to fight against that. And then bringing this to open source, it's again very much the open source ethos of, again, transparency and uh, you know bringing a contribution to the table, right?
Mhm.
Without some kind of reliance on a title or an argument based on authority. It really comes down to what are you bringing this to this community, and do they find it valuable, right? So
Right. And you have a lot more, I would say, direct community management experience through Vesper, um,
right,
which
right.
which I
But I have
wanted
a
to
great team
talk.
behind me. Yeah, I want to double
Hmm.
underscore that it's not me or mostly me.
Hmm.
That we have a great set of community managers, both officially appointed and otherwise, that make that job easy. So,
Yeah, and I definitely want to unpack that. But my question to you, revolving around that, is how do you think about community management for decentralized projects like Vesper? Because it's not your typical community. It's one of the largest DeFi communities, arguably. You guys have over 1.6 billion in total value locked. Nearly, I just
yeah.
searched through the Discord channel today. You have like nearly 700 members, several community admins, and you got a lot of cool stuff going. So I'm curious how you think about community
Oh, I think
management.
we're I think we're up to 3,000 members actually.
Oh, okay.
You might have been looking at who was online at that time.
Yeah, it was probably just who
But
was
yeah,
online
no,
then.
yeah, it's closer to 3,500, I think. Um, you know, I mean, kind of looking at the community management piece in a way that is parallel to how we're looking at Vesper, right? So, for listeners and viewers who are perhaps new to Vesper, um, you know, we aim to make DeFi as easy as humanly possible. And the analogy I often use is that we want to make, putting your crypto in DeFi as easy as picking a fund in your 401k, right? And if you've ever had the experience of a 401k, you know which funds are made out of what, right? So you know their composition, right?
Hmm.
Oh, this is the mid cap growth technology opportunity fund, or this is the conservative bond fund, or this is the aggressive international opportunity fund or something like that. And it's marketed that way for a reason, right? And because it's clear, and we that's what we are doing with Vesper. At the same time, we are expanding to new and different yield generating products. Right now we offer opportunities in ETH wrapped Bitcoin, USDC. We just launched a link pool, and we have a DAI pool as well. And that's deposit your crypto, get more crypto, right? We're going to have a product that is, you deposit crypto X, you're going to earn crypto Y, right? And that has a whole
Hmm.
bunch of other aspects to it as well. And over time, obviously we started with identifiable members, right? I'm here under my real name and putting my own reputation on the line, as are our co-founders. Jeff Garzik, who was one of the early contributors to Bitcoin, Matthew Rozak, who is a longtime investor, Jordan Kruger, who is our head of DeFi here at Block. So it's starting from a very small, very identifiable team, and it's moving out from there. And our goal, I like to call it the mission, the mantra, and the measuring stick, um, is to slowly cede that control to the community over time in a way that is thoughtful and doesn't throw caution to the wind. So that's how Vesper is moving towards more of a DAO-like structure, and we're doing it in incremental steps. And we're doing that the same way. We're doing it the same way in marketing, right? In the
Hmm.
marketing and communications piece. And for example, just today we announced that our brand guidelines, complete with scalable vector graphics and the color palette and the typeface and everything you need to produce more or less official looking Vesper stuff, art, merchandise, etc., is online. It's in our Gitbook docs, ready to go. Um, Very early on in the beta process, we had a few people raise their hand and say, um, you know, I want to be a community manager, or I want to help with growth hacking, or I want to help with any number of things. You yourself distinguished yourself by contributing that intro and how-to video,
Hmm.
which was since translated to Japanese, actually, by
And it got
community
double the views
members.
of mine, which I'm very bitter about.
Which halfway around the world somebody grabbed your video and did something with it, and
Yeah.
it's wonderful to see. And I find it very gratifying every time um, I go into our Discord in the comms marketing channel, and what's different about the Vesper community versus other communities I've observed is that very often communities will quickly descend into, what have you done for me? Whereas the Vesper community distinguishes itself by saying, what can I do? Right. And I think that's very, very profound. And it's something that I want to make sure is encouraged. And over time, the best thing that I think I can do is be seen as um, less of a quote unquote leader or CMO or whatever, and at the most be seen as an effective convener, if that's even a term, an effective convener of a community, and able to deliver very few, very narrowly drawn rules that allow creativity and evangelism to flourish. And I see that as my role.
So what do you think you guys did differently to create that more service-minded community?
If I had to put my finger on one thing, it was the extended beta period that we had. We initiated our beta in, let's see, December 22nd, 2020,
Hmm.
which extended to the date of the full launch, which was February 17th, 2021. And I think that runway helped not only in terms of, you know, everybody just sort of, from an engineering perspective and a build perspective, crossing every T, dotting every I. We certainly spent a lot of time working on the Vesper user interface, which I'm glad to say people always bring up. Right? People always say, "I love the Vesper Good, because we spent a lot of time on it,
Hmm.
and I'm glad that everybody loves it. But I think also as a consequence during that time, people who discovered our Discord early found out that they could have some level of influence over how things were going to go. And especially during those early days, excuse me, especially during those early days, you could see, and in fact, he's still very active. Jeff Garzik is, was essentially the host of it during the early days, and I think that helped as well, right? Is that people felt that they had some influence, they had access, they had ownership. Now, of course, it was an incentivized beta, right? Um, so they felt that they had ownership, and I think that was instrumental in inspiring that kind of esprit de corps that you point out.
Got it. All right. So I know we um, emailed a little bit on this. Any thoughts on DAOs and how they might impact online communities?
I think if I think if DAOs do their job correctly, right, and if we have good case studies to point to, um, there will be no difference between what we call a DAO and what we call an online community, right? And I
Hmm.
I would love to see a point, and again, this is the techno utopian in me speaking. Um, I would love to see a point where when we talk about online communities, that there always is some kind of ownership component that a DAO presents, right? Just like, for example, when I talk about blockchain technology and marketing, um, we know we are doing our jobs as marketers in this space when we figure out that a way to make the technology disappear. Um, because one of my favorite examples is something called RSS, or really simple syndication. It was a very popular technology during the emergence of social media and Web 2.0. And it was basically an easy way for web content to be, shuttled back and forth between sites and into your browser, et cetera, et cetera. And nobody thinks about it now.
Hmm.
It's great for enthusiasts like myself, but nobody thinks about it now. It's kind of disappeared into the woodwork of the internet, and I think we're going to be seen as doing our job right as marketers when blockchain technology does the same thing. And at a certain point, maybe my kids will remember an age of digital stone knives and bearskins, where the internet was less trustworthy than it is when they're my age, right? But there
Hmm.
was a period of time where, oh my God, people tolerated this, right? And now they think of it, they'll think of it as, not a big deal. And maybe as a corollary to that, maybe as you know online communities come together in various platforms, whatever ends up doing to Facebook what Facebook did to MySpace, I think will probably be a DAO of some kind, or be governed by it in some way.
It's interesting.
um, and the interface that you get maybe will be abstracted from it in a sense, but um, there have been interesting experiments in doing this, but I think it'll only be successful to the degree to which it just becomes accepted and expected as part of the experience.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know if you've used BitClout or have heard of BitClout, but kind of.
Heard of it? Um, I uh, unfortunately, it was easy for me to kind of dismiss because I saw clout, and I went, "Oh, KLOUT back in the
Hmm.
day." And but I encountered it, and I haven't dug into it more deeply. But I'm not going to discourage anybody that wants to try these things out. No, but I hadn't gone into it very deeply. No.
Yeah, no, I do think decentralized media is kind of the future of social media.
Yeah.
I think we're still on a pretty early stage, and there's a lot of clunky UI UX issues, but it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time. And if we do have a blockchain-based technology that usurps Facebook and Twitter.
Right, and there have been experiments and attempts and things like that, and it's something I absolutely encourage. My only fear is that there's a wonderful book by Virginia Postrel called "The Future and Its Enemies," and she identifies what are the enemies of the future, and she calls them stasists, right? People who are intent on preserving the status quo, right? And the statists come in two species. One are the technocrats that will try to say, well, this innovation is fine if you do it here, 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 and here, and in this particular way, on a Tuesday, so on and so forth, when the sun is out.
Hmm.
And then there are the reactionaries that don't even have that level of nuance and just say, well, just get rid of it. Make it go away. You
Right.
know, stand athwart history, yelling "stop," as William F. Buckley said. So I think that's what's most going to hobble this this present revolution is it's going to come from one of the two statist camps, and I think one of the advantages of decentralization is that how and to what degree uh, does that cooperation matter, right? And I think companies and governments and that sort of thing, they are certainly instruments of control. Um, and how often have you seen press releases that say, "Us, big company, are embracing blockchain, and this legitimizes the category"? How many times? How many
Yeah.
times have we seen that press release? Right?
Hmm.
Uh, Here comes the conquering hero. We have legitimized blockchain. We have legitimized crypto. And it did not wait for the imprimatur of a company or a government to be seen to be legitimate, right?
Hmm.
It's legitimate on purely on the basis of people getting together in distributed communities and deciding this this is what I want to see in the world. Let's make it happen, right? And so I would say to those kinds of organizations, governments and companies and that sort of thing, is that it it's a world that's not waiting for their endorsement, but but would welcome their collaboration, right? And that is, I understand, a humbling experience, perhaps, but I think that that is the most that governments and companies can hope for is you know, you know is to basically say again, it's not, what have you done for me? It's not even what I'm going to do to you. It's, what can I do? How can I help?
Are you maybe suggesting that governments embrace the hacker ethic?
Right. Well, I mean, even if you don't um, fully subscribe to the tenets there, I mean, it's just a good way to behave, right?
Hmm.
You know, I mean, you look at the Ten Commandments, and you don't have to be a Christian to look at the Ten Commandments and go, oh, do not kill, do not bear false witness. Okay, I can get behind that.
Right.
And it's the same thing with the hacker credo, right?
Hmm.
It's no bogus criteria. I think we touched on that a little earlier in this conversation. The notion
Hmm.
of no bogus criteria, um, access to computing technology must be complete. What there's 7 tenets. All of them are escaping me right now, but yeah, I think that again, even if you aren't in computing and maybe don't subscribe to the popular notion of quote unquote hacker, um, if you read the hacker's credo, I forget where originally it was published. Um, Again, it's not a bad way to run things. It's not a bad way to live one's life. So.
So pivoting again slightly, how can someone break into a crypto marketing slash communications role?
You asked me this today when I have spent more time recruiting in the last week than I have in 10 years. The Look, I mean, the talent pool is very rich, or I should say that the talent need is very rich. The talent pool is very shallow. Um, what do I mean by that? Is that you've got a lot of crypto experts, even people who might fancy themselves crypto influencers, who maybe don't understand marketing, communications, public relations, public affairs. Um, you've got incredibly talented people in communications, marketing, public relations, and public affairs who don't want to get into crypto because they've heard way too many stories about oh my god, currency of drug dealers. We've heard all that nonsense before. Um, and the best way I think one can come in is if one were to overbalance on communication savvy, marketing savvy, that sort of thing, understanding how to reach an audience, how to predict that audience's need. Um, those are incredibly valuable skills, right? Whereas, I get a lot of resumes and I try to be a mentor. Um, but far too often the conversation starts and stops with, I have 10,000 Twitter followers, and I'm like, that's bravo, and I'm sure you worked really hard for those 10,000 Twitter followers. Um,
Hmm.
but can I rely on that person to make a really savvy, decision in the organization's and the audience's best interests? So I tell people, especially when I'm recruiting, because I'm recruiting both within the cryptosphere and I'm recruiting outside of the cryptosphere. And to that latter audience who maybe might have some nervousness, not about the whole currency of drug dealers thing, but oh my God, the learning curve is going to be insane. Um, I mean, I tell them I can teach you crypto a hell of a lot faster than I can teach somebody public relations, communications, and marketing, right?
Mm,
Um, and for some people, particularly people with PR agency backgrounds, where they have to get spun up really quickly on a topic or a company or whatever, that instinct is already built in, right?
mm,
That instinct is already part of that DNA. For people who really want to break into this space and be superlative and to stand out, it helps if you've already volunteered for a project somewhere and have delivered some kind of provable success. Um, an ability to create content that resonates, you know, good writing, good video skills, um, you know, being able to tell a story, and then also being able to describe, um, what one did in a crisis or a bear market or any number of those things. That's absolutely what I'm looking for. So you asked this question at a very opportune time
mhm,
because the war for quality talent in crypto, um, I'll be honest, I've never seen anything like it. And I've gone through the dot-com boom of the 90s. I've gone through the social media boom of the 2000s. And here we are in, deep into, 20, early 2020s. And, the, the desire for talent is great, but any company, any crypto organization worth working for is going to want to have answers for those questions about the skill and craft of communications and marketing itself, right?
mhm.
Versus necessarily, I don't want to discount domain knowledge in crypto, but because that is also very, distinguishing. I don't want to distinguish that at all, but I would like to amplify, um, you know, all of the other skills that are necessary in order to be successful in any communications or marketing scenario.
That's great. So, Phil, I know we got to land this plane. I got a couple quick questions for you if you still got time.
I could do this all night. Go for it.
So, you are widely considered the PR industry's first blogger.
You found that? Okay.
I did.
All
What
right.
is or will be the next best first for PR professionals?
Okay. So, yes, I am known August 2000. When was it? It was August 2002, I think. Was no
It was
earlier,
about
earlier.
maybe 2001, right?
2001. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, that's a whole long story about how I ended up at that point. I didn't sit there going, "I'm going to be the first person to do this." Um,
Mhm.
I think that the next first, sort of merging all of my favorites here, is something akin to what maybe you're seeing Verizon do on its corporate communications page, which is they've started using blockchain technology in that notarizing capacity that I described a little bit earlier with Reconto. Um, they're starting to use it as part of their newsroom, and I would love to see corporate communicators and journalists do that at scale, right?
Mhm.
Um, and really start to put trust back into uh, what is right now not very trustworthy, digital media, right? The analogy I use is that, um, you know, in the past, you could have a communications medium that was open or a communications medium that was secure, but you can't have both, right? So,
Hmm.
20th century, you have newspapers and you have radio, and once that print hit the page, you're not going to change it, right? Once the bell has been rung on the radio, you can't unring it, you can't unbroadcast it. So, and the means of production were actually very expensive. So it's secure from that perspective, but it's not very open for that reason, right? Then you've got, the internet era, social media, Wikipedia, right? It's very open, but it's just not very secure, right? Because you
Hmm.
could log on to Wikipedia right now, and you would have scarcely fewer privileges on that system than the founder himself, Jimmy Wales, right? Now they have an audit trail, but do you have a reason to trust the Wikipedia audit trail? I don't know. But with blockchain technology poured on top of publishing, we now have uh, we now have the ability to have publishing that is both secure and open, right? And I think while the Verizon case is an interesting one, I think it's just waiting for somebody to really do it at scale. So
Got it. Yeah, I was thinking you might say someone to first mint an NFT, but
done. Hey, well, I did it not in a marketing sense. I
yeah.
not in a marketing sense, but for Mother's Day last year, I made my wife an NFT, like
Hmm.
like like a mom badge, and we actually we had we've had an ongoing joke in my family that we should give medals for exemplary domestic behavior. So the parent that has to fish a kid's tooth out of the toilet, and I won't go into too much detail. That person gets the the domestic excellence badge, and
Hmm.
so we've been joking about this even before we got married, and I figured for Mother's Day I would create it, just a badge for, again, exemplary household behavior, and she's had it since Mother's Day, and due to gas fees, actually, she doesn't want to transfer it. I'd like to think I've done exemplary things in the meantime as a husband, but gas fees being what they are.
Hmm.
But marketing is there. My only fear is that the marketing services industry, there is no card they won't overplay. And I am concerned with NFTs that nobody is actually talking about the limitations very much. And now it's like, oh my God, it's like, is it in danger of jumping the shark? Now, I think it's a wonderful technology which has a lot of great uses, right? But 2 weekends ago, it was a send up on Saturday Night Live,
Hmm.
and and uh, King marketer Gary Vaynerchuk is keynoting the Consensus Conference this year, talking about NFTs. Right? It's like, whoa, okay, are we, you know, is the marketing services industry just bear hugging NFTs too much? I don't know. Um, and I hope that people are eyes wide open as to the limitations of the technology. But I still think it has incredible potential, as we've seen, with the NBA and stuff like that.
Now, for the limitations, you're referring to possibly the Defiance article, right? On
Oh, that was great, wasn't it? That I swear to God, I emailed the journalist, Dan. I emailed him right afterwards, and I was like,
hmm.
"Thank God you wrote that." Right?
Hmm.
Because I've passed it to so many people in the marketing trade. It's like, read this before you recommend NFTs to your clients, right? And make sure you have a plan for, how you're going to make this work and make it sustainable, right? Because the marketing services industry is notorious for this, where they will sell some of the big brands on like things like branded microsites, for example. So let's say McDonald's is going to come out with a oh, I don't know, a lamb's meat burger or something like that. Who knows? And so chances are their marketing team will sell in something like McLamb.com, and McLamb.com goes up, and after the promotion's over, it becomes abandonware. It's not maintained. Somebody doesn't renew the domain name. It rots off the web. That happens in the marketing services industry more often than you think, where after the award is conferred, the invoice is paid, and all that jazz, this stuff just becomes abandonware. And what happens with NFTs, as the article rightly points out, is that more often than not, it functions as a deed to a location somewhere on the web. And there are certainly sophisticated ways to do it through IPFS and that sort of thing. The unsophisticated way is to just point to a URL and say, hey, this is the thing you have a deed to. And if that website goes offline, or in the worst case scenario, somebody replaces that web address with something you didn't buy, something that may be offensive, I don't know.
Hmm.
But again, to the master point, I really hope the marketing services industry, all the PR agencies and the ad agencies, I really do hope they're thinking about this very, very carefully. Because again, the instinct is execute the program, get the KPIs, get paid, submit for a few awards, go on to the next thing,
Right.
right? And I hope that doesn't happen with NFTs.
And hopefully that's a key takeaway for the consumer to do their own research and figure
Right,
out
right,
if the NFT they're getting is not going to be abandonware, like you said later on.
right. That if sufficient attention has been paid to the ongoing storage and permanence of whatever it is they think they bought, right? They may
Right.
find they expensively rented it. So
Yeah. So, one last question before I let you go. What can you tell the viewers and listeners about the Cachaça Diaries? I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Cachaça Diaries. Okay. Yeah. So I married into a Brazilian family in 2007, and my in-laws are well known within the cachaça appreciation societies of Rio de Janeiro, and got me into it. And and I was just fascinated by, well, here's a spirits category that's native to Brazil that I had never heard of as a gringo, and with so much richness and depth and diversity. So for listeners that don't know, cachaça is the native spirit of Brazil. It is just as much a national spirit as bourbon is in the United States. Um, and it's made out of freshly squeezed sugarcane juice, right? So as opposed to rum, which tends to be made from molasses, the definition of cachaça is that it's made in Brazil. It's made from freshly squeezed, fermented, and distilled sugarcane juice. And what fascinated me about this category was the just the even within that narrow definition, the incredible diversity you get, um, the incredible diversity you get from the different native woods that you can age this spirit in, right? And sometimes it's aged conventionally in oak, and oak is a very familiar flavor to North Americans. But sometimes it's done in using woods that are only available in Brazil, and so you get amazing taste profiles depending on what wood it's been aged in, and whether it's been aged in wood at all. Sometimes they age it in stainless steel tanks. I've got one cachaça. I've got about 50 bottles in my collection, and I got one
Wow.
cachaça that was aged in a stone pit in the ground lined with paraffin wax. Uh, and it's actually okay. Um, and so what happened was in 2015, I had a sabbatical. And of course, my in-laws, I mean, were the most generous people on the planet Earth. They've often taken me to these distilleries all around Rio. And there was one of them I liked in particular, Cachaça Werneck, which was the proprietor uh, was the CEO of Volvo Penta Brazil. So Volvo Penta is the boat motor division of Volvo. And when he retired, he and his wife decided to start a distillery. About 3 hour-ish drive out of Rio, maybe more. And it came time where I had a 3 week sabbatical. And I told my in-laws, I said, okay, remember that guy that used to be the CEO of Volvo Penta Brazil? Um, uh, I want to apprentice with him for 2 weeks. I don't expect to get paid. I want some kind of guarantee that I'm not taking a job from somebody who's relying on it to make a living. Um, but what I do want is I just want the experience of making cachaça. And so I made my pitch to Eli Vernick, and he said, absolutely. And I will tell you, it was 2 weeks, reveille at 6 a.m. We didn't get back to the residence until about 11 p.m. Uh, I don't think I don't know anybody else who worked that hard during their sabbatical, frankly. But
Yeah.
we made, but from the cutting to the juicing to the fermenting, the distilling, um, we made about 750 liters in 2 weeks, which is a lot for a small batch distillery like Vernick. And
Did you say 750 liters?
yeah,
That's incredible.
yeah. So by the time you standardize, it was at an average of 51% alcohol. So by the time you step it down to 40%, you're talking about 1,400 bottles worth. It's 1,400, 750 ml bottles,
Wow.
and uh, and it was an incredible experience. I mean, and yeah, it was 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. most nights, but it was absolutely incredible. And I have a stock presentation that I give, the Kashasa Diaries, and I actually the other day, as I was poking around my office, I found my handwritten notes from that period, which I'm going, well, one of these days I need to scan it for posterity, that sort of thing. But
Then you can
I
mint
encourage
it as an
anybody
NFT.
to, right, exactly. Then I'll sell it as an NFT and see what happens.
Nice. Well, that's incredible. So Phil, I mean, thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day again.
My
Just to
pleasure.
just to wrap up, where can people find you, and any other last words you'd like to give?
Sure. Let me give a plug for my employer and all our brands, right? So block.com, bloq.com. Obviously, we're doing a lot of work right now with Vesper Finance, vesper.finance. So please give that a look. If you're into mining, check us out at titan.io. So that's software and services and protocols to make mining better. We like to say that we had the very first DeFi project. Go to metronome.io, check us out there. Me personally, I'm at philgomes.com, and I'm at philgomes on Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you.